Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Tyler, and I'm broadcasting just days before Christmas in a very snowy Baltimore area. It feels very cozy, very comfy, very seasonal, but what it doesn't feel like is that the hot stove is on at all when it comes to the Baltimore Orioles. Yes, we know they have made signings this offseason. That's great. They've gotten to Christmas, and they've already made some significant signings. Eli talked about Tomoyuki Sagano last episode. I talked about Tyler O'Neill and Gary Sanchez the episodes before that. That's awesome. I think the Orioles are better right now than they were when the offseason started, and that's great. There is, of course, still room for improvement. They still need a top of the line starter. Are they going to get that? It's gotten really quiet on that front. I'm not so sure. They maybe need a fourth outfielder. No talk there. They maybe need some bullpen depth. No talk there. These are all things that I think I would love to get into today. I kind of want to just talk about the Orioles roster, where it's at, and specifically where the payroll is at with the Orioles for 2025 already compared to 2024, because I think that's relevant when you talk about what other moves the Orioles are going to make. So what that's what we're going to get into on this episode, just kind of laying the base there. We're going to get into that on this episode because as I record this right now, there really aren't any big rumors right now. I think a lot of things are starting to quiet down a little bit around baseball going into Christmas. Like I said, I'm recording this on the 20th of December. We still have a few days, and I think in prior years you see a lot of deals kind of come in these last couple days, even onto Christmas Eve. Some stuff comes in last minute, and the Orioles are very quiet day to day anyway. So it's not that I would expect a ton of news regardless, but just kind of laying that base of what's happening right now is not a whole lot. So I want to kind of take this time where there's a bit of a lull in Orioles news and kind of dig in a little bit more on where the Orioles currently stand and what they could potentially do with the rest of this offseason by looking at the roster and the payroll situation, both for the Orioles and even around the league to kind of just kind of dig through that stuff a little bit. Before we get into that, I do want a little bit of a reminder here that we are part of the Believe Podcast Network. I really appreciate the support that Believe has given us this past year or so. That's why there's now ads on the episodes on most platforms. So thank you for sitting through those. That helps us, make a little bit to keep this show going. Also, they've helped us kind of kick it up a notch, get our message out there a little bit more. And if you like what we've done so far, head over to Believe.com. That's BLEAV.com and check out the other shows on the network. Also, they've hooked us up with sponsors this year, and one of those sponsors is, of course, Bet Online, and they are sponsoring this episode. Bet Online continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, Bet Online provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, college basketball, NHL, and even UFC, you can head to Bet Online today. And if you use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, you get a welcome bonus on your first deposit. Again, that's promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, for a welcome bonus on your first deposit. Thanks, Bet Online. The game starts here for sponsoring today's episode of the Warehouse Podcast. So let's talk about payrolls in general for where Major League Baseball is nowadays. I think it gets talked a lot about how there is no salary cap in Major League Baseball, and that is unique in North American professional sports. There are caps in the NFL, which is, the most popular sport, professional sport at least, in the United States. Makes a ton of money, has no issue with generating revenue, eyeballs, all that stuff. And I think people point to that and say, look, they've got a cap and they're just crushing it right now. That's what every league should emulate. NBA has a cap, again, crushing it. Maybe not as much so recently as it was probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, it felt like, where LeBron was really at his peak, Steph Curry was at his peak. Like, people were really tuning in. I think that's waned a little bit in recent years. And the NHL has a cap as well. And, for all the struggles that MLB has, NHL, I can't think is doing better than MLB in pretty much any metric you look at. MLB would still be above them in terms of a lot of things, revenue, audience sizes, TV sizes, all that stuff. They have a cap as well. So I think that talking point doesn't really hold a lot of water. And it also, at the same time, isn't necessarily true that baseball doesn't have a salary cap. I would say for 25 of the teams in the league, it's a 30-team league, there pretty much is a salary cap. And that is this luxury tax threshold that has been implemented for a while now. and is agreed to through 2026 when the next CBA needs to be agreed to. And a lot of people are talking about, a cap or not a cap potentially being a big hold up point in terms of a collective bargaining agreement beyond 2026. So this is something that I think is really relevant for baseball fans to totally wrap their brains around, because I think especially with what the Juan Soto deal sort of showed us is that there are certain teams that they don't really care that this luxury tax exists, and other teams really do. And teams that don't, like a Steve Cohen with the New York Mets, is a guy that is independently very, very wealthy. I mean, all these owners are very wealthy, but even if you compare like a Steve Cohen who owns a team in New York, is independently wealthy with, I think he's a hedge fund guy. Then there's the Steinbrenner family that owns most of the Yankees. The Steinbrenners themselves are not really independently very wealthy. The Yankees are just such a significant brand. They are the most popular worldwide, nationwide baseball team in the world. They make a ton of revenue. They are the largest revenue generating team in Major League Baseball. But the Steinbrenners themselves do not have tons of money that doesn't come from the New York Yankees themselves. So while they can really compete in terms of payroll because they get so much out of the New York Yankees, they aren't always willing to go above and beyond that tax threshold because they know they've got to pay on top of that. And they are, at the end of the day, trying to run a business that makes money for them to live off of. Granted, it's millions and millions of dollars, so they're not hurting. But you get what I'm saying is that they need to make sure that it makes sense. The bottom line needs to make sense for the New York Yankees year after year. So they can't necessarily just pay somebody for production that they aren't necessarily going to see back in their bottom line. Whereas the New York Mets, Steve Cohen, the Mets are a vanity project for him a little bit. Not to say the Mets don't make money. They have more revenue than other teams, but they certainly don't have the type of revenue that the New York Yankees do. So there's sort of even within like the classes of the upper class of Major League Baseball, you see sort of some segmentation and striations there that were really put on display, just a couple weeks ago with the Juan Soto sweepstakes. So let's talk about the luxury tax threshold and what it means, and essentially how it serves as a soft cap. And for some teams, essentially, it's a hard cap. So what it does is it puts a threshold on spend on payroll up to a certain amount. And when you go beyond that amount, you have to pay a tax on every dollar you spend over that threshold. So in 2024, the luxury tax threshold was $237 million. If you spend $238 million, you'd have to spend $200,000 extra on top of that because you're spending 20% on the overage. That's for the first year you do it. If you do it 2 years in a row, you have to pay 30% on the overage. 3 years in a row, you have to pay 50% on the overage. And so what teams do a lot of the time is they say, okay, I'm willing to go over it for a year and I'll pay overages that year, but I don't want to go over it 2 years in a row because then I have to pay even more on top of it, which is something we see the Yankees do a lot. You see the Yankees go over for a year, then get back under it for a year. I think what the Chicago Cubs are doing right now is an example of this. They went a little bit over it in 2024. They still want to be competitive in 2025, which then explains a trade where they add Kyle Tucker, who makes a lot of money, but not an exorbitant amount, especially not for the production he provides for 1 year. I think he makes like 15 million or something like that. But then trade away a Cody Bellinger, who is, I think, still a very competent player going to the New York Yankees. Obviously, the Yankees aren't trying to trade for guys that aren't going to help them meet their goals hopefully their aspirations rather of going to the World Series again, winning the World Series. Still a good player, but not a good player for $21 million or $25 million, whatever Cody Bellinger's, salary is. They felt Kyle Tucker was more valuable to them at the Cubs, so they can save $10 million, get more talent, get them under the threshold, and keep them still with some spending money to, again, not exceed that threshold 2 years in a row. So that's sort of an explanation of what this cap does. And then there are teams like the New York Mets who I think care about this threshold to a degree. You don't want to spend, indiscriminately and flush money down the toilet. But because Steve Cohen has so much money, he is the richest Major League Baseball owner. he's more comfortable going into his own pocket and signing these checks and these paying these taxes because he wants to have fun. This is a little bit of gambling. This is a little bit of, like I said, a vanity project. He's okay with doing those things. And I think that's just kind of a good explainer for folks to kind of have that base level understanding of why there are these differences between some clubs, even between there's a lot of halves, there's a lot of there's very few halves, at least the way they position themselves in Major League Baseball. It's really the Yankees, Red Sox, Dodgers, Cubs. I think the Blue Jays you would put in there. The Blue Jays have a ton of money. It's a very wealthy family that owns the Blue Jays. They are the team in Canada, which Canada is a much smaller population than the United States, but it's, whatever. I think it's like 50 or 60 million people, mostly rooting for a Blue Jays team. That is a massive fan base, a massive, influx of cash that a lot of other organizations don't have. The Blue Jays struggle to still sign players because living in a different country is a competitive disadvantage, I think, when it comes to attracting talent. They've done it sometimes. They got George Springer up there, but doesn't always happen. So those are really like the big halves in the league, and you start to see those teams really accumulating the talent, while the have-nots, the other 25 teams, which isn't, not always true, but the way they position themselves as small market or whatever it is, these are the teams that view this threshold as more of a hard cap that they don't ever want to go over. And for even some teams below that, where the Orioles, I think, consider themselves in like the bottom third of markets in Major League Baseball, they don't even want to come close to approaching this threshold, which is kind of where we're at now. Now, this comes in light of some reporting, I would say dubious reporting, single source reporting, an article from pitcherlist.com that cited that Mike Elias, although being given the green light from ownership to spend, do whatever he thinks makes sense to make this team go on a World Series run, he prefers his method of building his pipeline that he's talked about for a long time, making it self-sufficient, not needing to overspend to attract talent, or, not attract talent, but not overspend to field a competitive team, I suppose, and believe in his methods rather than, buying talent through the free agent market necessarily. Nobody else has really backed up that reporting. As I've mentioned maybe in this episode, and I know on this podcast before, the Orioles run a very tight ship. Reporters kind of talk about ad nauseum that the Orioles are a very tight-lipped organization. Nobody knows what's going to happen with them day to day. I think that's very well illustrated by the Corbin Burns move last year. That was never reported anywhere until it was happening. The Sagano signing just this week, I didn't hear anything about that until the signing actually happened. That kind of came out of left field. And honestly, really the same for the Tyler O'Neill and the Gary Sanchez signings. Like, you could draw some lines that say the Orioles are in the market for a right-handed outfielder and O'Neill makes sense, sure. But there was no reporting saying like the Orioles are in on O'Neill that I recall. Same thing with Sanchez. So all that is just to say that I don't know if Mike Elias is steadfast against spending more on the free agent market. Maybe not. I think he does have methods and preferences and beliefs in terms of how to build a team that he thinks makes it more sustainable. I know he has echoed the Guardians and the Rays as a model for building in a small market, which is all fine and well, but at the same time, I think there are ebbs and flows to this that maybe he doesn't want to acknowledge. He doesn't want to acknowledge that you're going to be a 95 win team some years and you're going to be a 70 win team other years. He wants to more be like an 85 win team year in and year out, which is what the Mariners general manager pretty much said last year. That's great. It does give you a interesting team year to year, but it doesn't necessarily make you feel like, oh, I've got a chance to win the World Series every single year. There are some differences in those two approaches. And I think the other thing that's relatively important to take note of is that the Orioles are starting to spend money this year. And that kind of brings me to like the meat of the episode, which is to say, let's take a look at payroll last year, payroll this year. This is a good example of where I think our YouTube channel kind of comes in handy here. What I'm going to do on our YouTube video is show my screen. I'm looking at Fangraphs and also Spot Track to just illustrate what the Orioles payroll looked like last year, sort of the differences going into this year, who they've lost, who they've added, and where the payroll sits right now, because they've actually made about a 30% increase already in dedicated payroll for 2025. And yes, there is room to increase that. The competitive balance, I'm sorry, the luxury tax threshold for 2025 is $241 million. The Orioles are nowhere near that right now. There is certainly room to spend, but just to say they are spending more now than they ever have been before, which maybe that reflects some of the pressure that Mike Elias feels. Maybe that reflects some of the backing that he's gotten from ownership to put his foot on the gas a little bit this year. So if you're interested in looking at that, I would just say go to youtube.com, search the Warehouse Podcast. We should pop up as the first result, and check us out there. If not, I'm going to try to, you know, explain what I'm looking at here in the audio version as well. So let's get into those numbers now, and let's talk first about what the Orioles 2024 payroll was. Now, nailing down exactly what the payroll was for 2024 seems like there is some flexibility in this. If you go to Spot Track, it has their 2024 payroll as $109 million. If you look at Fangraphs and their roster resource tool, it has their 2024 payroll at $103 million. That feels close enough to agree. Like it's 103, 105, 110, somewhere in that ballpark is what the Orioles spent last year. Now, they've lost Corbin Burns, who made $15 million last year. They've got Anthony Santander off the books. He made almost $12 million last year. James McCann is gone. He made $4 million last year. Again, remember, he had a bigger base salary, but the Mets paid a lot of that. They got rid of John Means. He made $3 million last year. Trying to see some other names on here as I scroll through. Those were the big ones, I believe. They did, of course, not offer arbitration to somebody like Jacob Webb, but he wasn't making huge money, only $1 million last year. So, they lost other guys too, but those are the big ones. 15 mil to Corbin Burns, 12 mil to Anthony Santander, 4 mil to James McCann. That right there is, almost $30 million combined, a little bit more than that they got off the books. Now, they've added this offseason, of course. Let's talk about who they've added before we get into the other big caveat, which is arbitration. So they've added Tyler O'Neill, $16 million. They have to pay Zach Eflin for the entire season versus just the last 2 months. He's going to make $18 million this year. They've signed Sagano to a $13 million deal. So 18, 13, that's $31 million. 16 million for Tyler O'Neill, that's $47 million. 8 million, 8.5 million to Gary Sanchez. That's over $50 million. Sir Anthony Dominguez here the whole year. He's making $8 million. Ryan O'Hearn got a raise when he picked up his option. Cionel Perez picked up his option. And Felix Bautista's back, I think, on the same deal he had last year. They signed him to that extension, although he's going to go into arbitration after this year. So it's a bit of a funky situation he's in, but only $1 million there. So that doesn't really make a change. But you kind of get the understanding there right away is O'Neill, Eflin, O'Neill, Sagano, and Sanchez. That's brand new money, entirely brand new money. That it's 8 million to Sanchez, 13 million to Sagano. That's 21 million, and then 16 million to Tyler O'Neill is $37 million right there in brand new money. Paying the whole year for Eflin, paying the whole year for Dominguez. That's another 20 plus million dollars there. The Orioles have spent a lot more with these additions of people they've added since the trade deadline last year, of basically 50 to 60 million more in spend compared to like opening day of 2024. Then you add in the guys that are going through arbitration. Gregory Soto going to get a raise in arbitration. Cedric Mullins going to get a raise in arbitration. Jorge Mateo, Ryan Mountcastle, Keegan Aiken, Trevor Rogers, Ramon Urias, Emmanuel Rivera, Tyler Wells, Dean Kramer, Adley Rutschman's going to get a nice bump for his first year of arbitration eligibility, up to almost $6 million likely. These are estimates from MLB Trade Rumors. Kyle Bradish, up to $2 million. You just get the picture here. So like 50-some million dollars of new money. Then across like all of these guys getting raises, that's at least probably 10 to 15 million more in spend in raises for these guys. So you're up to like $65 million more in spend. So you took away 30 in losing Burns, McCann, and Santander, but you've added basically 60-ish or so in arbitration raises and new salaries since the end of last year. So the Orioles 105 million-ish payroll from the end of last year is now about 130 to 140 million dollars in payroll this year, and that is while they still have holes in in the roster. Fangraphs estimates their 2025 payroll right now at 134 million dollars, which is 31 million more dollars than their estimated final 2024 payroll. That's a pretty big bump. That's a 30% bump in payroll year over year, and that is before the Orioles add anybody else. Now, I don't know what David Rubenstein and his partners have told uh, Mike Elias, but that's a pretty significant increase in payroll year over year. How much more do they want to go? How much more are they comfortable with? Does it matter? Is there a limit? And I can't answer those questions. I can tell you that the luxury tax threshold for 2025 is $241 million. So the Orioles have between their 134 payroll committed essentially in 2025 and that over $100 million they could spend. That is plenty of room to go give Corbin Burns $30 million. That is plenty of room to trade for someone if they see the value in it. There's plenty of room there to do maneuvering. Now you want to leave some room for in-season trades, which again, ownership showed last year they were comfortable doing some of that. They added Eflin, they added Dominguez, they added Eloy Jimenez, that weird trade. They did that. They took on a lot of salary in the second half of last year and they were comfortable doing it. So I don't think that I think what I want to say is they've demonstrated a loosening of the purse strings that the Angelos family was not showing. John Angelos specifically was not showing the last few years. Now, that report I cited earlier from Pitcher List says that John Angelos gave Mike Elias the go-ahead to trade for Juan Soto last year, and Elias simply didn't want to. Now, do I believe he simply didn't want to? I'm sure a call was made. Why would you not call? I think we heard reporting prior to last year that at the deadline in 2023 that he had contacted the Angels about trading for Shohei Ohtani. Like that was a rare rumor we heard about that the Orioles were involved in trade talks for a guy that was making a lot of money at that point, had gone through arbitration already, was, about to be a free agent, was making a lot of money. That to me indicates that the Angelos family had told them, hey, we can take on some more money here if you think this team's got a shot to make it. And that didn't happen. Now that could have been Elias rather not wanting to pay whatever the price was in prospects to get Ohtani. That's understandable. But at the same time, financially, it shows me the Angelos family had kind of loosened the reins there a little bit too. So I think we're getting these signs here recently that the Orioles are willing to spend a little bit more money. I think the other thing that we need to think about is, are they leaving room? Is Henderson leaving room? Is ownership leaving room for some kind of an extension here? Is there an extension coming for Gunnar Henderson? Probably not. Gunnar Henderson just saw Juan Soto make $750 million. Gunnar Henderson could be that guy in 4 years. He'll be a young dude, plays shortstop, is a better defender, is a better base runner. Not quite the offensive force, but in a lot of ways very close to what Juan Soto is at the plate. He can probably get a ton of money, even if he slots over to third base, when he's in his late 20s. There's a lot of money to be made out there for Gunnar Henderson. Adley Rutschman, could there be an extension there? Maybe. Maybe there could be. He's a catcher who really fell apart in the second half last year. They've got Samuel Basallo coming. Is that something the Orioles want to do? I'm not so sure. Outside of those two, who else do you want to extend? Colton Cowser, maybe? He showed a lot of exciting things. You could get him signed up to an early extension, buy out some free agency, buy out arbitration. Maybe there's something there. Kobe Mayo, if he comes up and you see something, Jackson Holliday, he comes up, you see something, you want to get these guys signed early, do a Bobby Witt type thing. Maybe you do that there. There is some things there that you say like, okay, we're not going to go get Corbin Burns for $30 million, but we're leaving room for these sorts of things to happen where we can afford to pay a guy, 20, 25, $30 million, a young guy who we're going to have until he's 30 something years old versus going and getting a pitcher that I think Mike Elias has kind of indicated he's not necessarily interested in paying for the downside of a pitcher's career. He's kind of said that year to year. And all of his actions to this point indicate that he's not really going to come off of that a little bit. So I think that's another thing to understand here is that they've already spent a lot compared to the last year. They maybe have some other tricks up their sleeve, and they might have some in-season maneuvering to come in 2025. Um, I think that Mike Elias doesn't always see the value in making a trade in the offseason where the market sometimes can be very competitive. There are a lot of teams that think they have a shot in the season ahead that as the season unfolds, they won't have a shot. They will fall apart in the season, and there's no sense in battling 10 teams for an arm when you could battle 5 teams for an arm in season. Same thing is true for the Orioles from their perspective is the Orioles I think right now think they're going to be a pretty good team in 2025. I don't know that they feel like a 100 win team. I don't know if they feel like a 95 win team even, but I think right now the Orioles feel like an 85 to a 90 win team that with a couple of in-season moves could become a 95 win team, could challenge the Yankees for the division. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. I don't feel like the Yankees are head and shoulders above the American League as though even though some people want to make it seem like that. Look, they lost Juan Soto. Yes, they've added some good pieces, but that offense was pretty atrocious last year outside of Judge and Soto. And now they don't have Soto. So I think the Orioles are right there neck and neck with the Yankees that if the season goes on and they make a couple of interesting additions, could catapult them ahead of the New York Yankees. I think Elias thinks about that too to say like, okay, let's not buy the guys now. People can get hurt. Let's wait until June, July. We see where the market's at. We see what teams are in the market. That the teams that they thought were going to be good that have fallen off. That's going to add options to the market that aren't available right now. I think Elias thinks about these things that are frustrating at times. I would love for them to go sign Corbin Burns. That solves a humongous problem for this team. That gives them an ace. It's already done it in their uniform. It's already shown in the playoffs he can do it for them. Yes, it's one game, but it was a really, really good performance. And then you can build from there. Kyle Bradish hopefully will come back. That gives you Burns and Bradish. Rodriguez, hopefully. Eflin has been good. Sagano, I'm pretty excited about that signing. It makes a lot of sense. Like, there's a lot of things about this that the team feels really good that if they make one or two other moves, this team feels like a favorite in the American League. The Astros just lost Kyle Tucker. They'll pull some rabbit out of their hat. The Rays are going to be more healthy this year, you would think, than they were in 2024. They're going to be right there. Like, I'm not saying the Orioles are running away with it either, but things feel pretty good for the Orioles if they add that ace pitcher. I just don't know that it's going to happen right now in the offseason, that is. But again, the Orioles are notoriously tight-lipped, and something could come up tomorrow that we haven't heard about at all and really flip the offseason on a dime. Um, so I think that like kind of gets most of it out there. I just kind of wanted to lay a base there that I feel like a lot of people talk about. We talk past each other a little bit with this during the winter is like just go sign the guy, like open up the pocketbook and I will say like these owners do all have the money to spend. We're seeing it with sorry, not the Oakland Athletics, the Athletics, the Sacramento Athletics, future Las Vegas Athletics maybe, that when push comes to shove, they can spend money. They are going to play in Sacramento in a minor league ballpark with likely embarrassing crowd sizes, with no fan base, with no future certainty, and yet they're finding money out of nowhere to sign Luis Severino to a club record contract. Like, if the Athletics can do it when they've cried poor for decades, any team can do it. And the Orioles, having brand new ownership, certainly have the money to pay Corbin Burns his $30 million a year to be probably a really good arm for at least 3 seasons. And then you see what happens after that. And I know as I say that, that's the exact reason Michael Elias doesn't want to do it is because he doesn't want to do the whole see what happens after that. But ownership's perspective, they have the money to do it. The Orioles can afford to sign these guys. They can afford to give Gunnar Henderson a big contract. They can't make Gunnar Henderson do it. He's got his own agency. He can seek the deal he wants, but they can do all these things. They can go above the luxury tax. They can pay over $100 million more on salary this year. Now they're not going to do that. You can almost guarantee they're not going to do it. And that's to just be realistic about it. Is that they've already gone $30 million above what they spent in 2024 going into 2025. They'll probably spend another $20 million between any other signings, trading for guys midseason. That's a 50% increase already. How much more logically is this ownership group going to do year over year? And how much, because that in turn puts heat on Mike Elias to perform. And we know it hasn't happened yet. And if his mentality is let's just be competitive and then you get into the playoffs and see what happens, which that might be what he thinks. then why is he going to put that added pressure on himself when he doesn't really believe that it bears any more fruit than simply a competitive team that gets in the playoffs does? So we just have to like understand that that's where what these numbers that ownership is likely looking at. These are the realities that Mike Elias is operating within. These are the philosophies that Mike Elias has kind of told us he has. Like, let's not be dumb about this. Mike Elias doesn't love signing free agent pitchers to long-term deals. He doesn't love doing it. He doesn't love taking a ton of risk. He believes you can build a sustainable organization with young talent and you can supplement it with veterans on short-term deals. That is what he has said. There are exceptions to every rule. I think if he could get a Gunnar Henderson extension done tomorrow that keeps him in Baltimore through his age 32 or 33 season, he would do it. But from Gunner's perspective, why would I do that when I can be a free agent at 27 and get a 10-year deal to stay paid through the age of 37 for way more money every single year? You get that too. Um, so these are just the realities that everyone is operating within, and we just have to understand that as fans. And we can certainly yell and scream about it, and we are entitled to do that, and we are right to do that. But we just have to understand that that's how things go. So I just wanted to talk about that. It's something that's been, all the Yankees are doing all the moving and shaking. The Mets are making big signings. The Giants are making big signings. They're another one of the halves. Um, but not all teams operate on that same plane, either because of ownership or because of front office philosophy. And we just have to understand that and get mad about it. Get mad about it because the CBA coming up in 2026 could be a big one that could change the landscape of baseball. And it could also lead to a strike that we have to be aware could be happening here. Not this season, but the next, that if something's not done, baseball as we know it could change forever. So yeah, hopefully that was clear on what I was trying to accomplish there. Don't want to overcomplicate stuff. This is a fun baseball podcast. We want to talk about the positives, the fun, all that stuff. But these are the financial realities and the personalities and the perspectives that we as fans also have to, navigate through when we're watching the game. So that's it. This is going to kind of I think we're going to get one more episode up before Christmas, so I won't do all the happy holidays stuff. But thanks for all the support this year, because I don't know if I'll be on here again before the end of the year. So thanks for all the support this year. We really appreciate it. If you like what we heard here, subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify. Just search for us, The Warehouse Podcast. We'll pop up there. As I said, we're on YouTube. Search for us there. We'd love to get to 300 subscribers by the start of spring training, which we got almost 2 months there. But give us a subscription there. It's free. What else? Give us a review, a rating and a review, 5 stars or a thumbs up or whatever the positive version is. Please give us a positive rating. It helps us reach other Orioles fans. We really appreciate it. A thumbs up on the YouTube video is great, in addition to a subscription. And, leave a comment on YouTube about what you think about what I'm saying here. Do you think it's all gobbledygook and the Orioles should just do whatever? Do you, think Mike Elias is being held down? Do you think Mike Elias or is it reverse? Mike Elias is a stubborn Ivy League guy who thinks he knows better than the fans do. I mean, he probably does, and he probably does think that. But leave a comment down. Let me know what you think. But that's really all I got. Follow us on social media at The Warehouse Pod. And yeah, just thanks so much for listening. Really appreciate it. And we'll be back soon with, I think, one more episode before Christmas, and then one more probably before the new year. And then we'll be hot and heavy, ready to go in 2025 for what should be a big year for both us and the Orioles. So thanks so much. And we'll talk to you soon.